Okay, I'm going to address the question of whether you need to be, um, well, you need to live in a country to get fluent in a language, to get truly fluent in a language. Um, so I think it's undoubtedly true that that's the case. So I'll talk a bit about why that's the case, but I think the problem with this perspective is it's misinterpreted, and people use it as a reason to not learn a language at all. Um, then I'll talk a bit about what I think you can actually get out of a language generally, and why you don't need to move to the countries to pick up a language if you use the proper tools. So there are two things that I think is worth mentioning with living in a country where the language is spoken. First of all, you're just constantly soaked in content, and if mechanized properly, that the content you're exposed to can get you to a very high level in the language very quickly, depending on what the language is. You know, you can have the best content sort of routine in the world. You know, you can have the radio if you're living in a place where the language isn't spoken. You can have the best habits in the world. You know, you can have a bit of radio in your language, in the target language. You can watch loads of shows, lots of TV shows in the language. You can read the newspaper in the language, but nothing comes close to being just living in the language, because you're just effortlessly exposed to it. And I'm not there to dispute that. I think that's true. And then secondly, I think there is something to be said for being exposed in a language for just several months without a break. You know, where you get to the point where you're really thinking in the language, and there's no way to really get that in any other way. You know, like living in the language to the point where you're really forced to think in the language. It means that you kind of have to be living in the country for that to happen. And if we are calling fluency like reaching a level where you can think in that language, then I think there's a case to be made that you have to live in the language to get truly fluent. Maybe people disagree with me, I'll be interested to know, but that seems to be my observations. And secondly, I want to talk about what does it mean to be completely fluent in a language, and is that the only aim you can have in learning a language? So we've already established that you learn a language at a slower pace if you're not in the country. And we've also established that to be completely fluent in a language, you have to be exposed into it non-stop for a long period of time, which can only realistically be done by living in that country. However, I don't think you need to be completely fluent in a language to reap the benefits of learning one. So I'll talk about this a bit in other videos, but I think it's true that there is like a sort of graph in language learning in terms of your return on investment. So you go through a large period of your language where you're not really getting any return on investment, and actually the appeal of learning the language is slowly declining. You start learning the language and it's very interesting, and it's very exciting and new, and it's a novel experience. And then as you learn more and more of the language, it starts becoming so interesting, and you're still not seeing your improvements in the language to the extent that it's useful in your day-to-day life. And I think the key to learning a language is just sticking out that intermediate plateau to a point where you start to get to a point where the language is useful to you, where you can understand it easily in daily conversation, and you can use it effortlessly. Now, I think the distinction I'm trying to make is you get out of that intermediate plateau, and you start reaping the benefits of learning a language where you can use it in a useful way. You get to that stage before you're completely fluent, before you can really think in the language like your own native language. And I think that's where most people want to be in a language. yes, it's great to be able to speak it, to really master it. But I don't think, you don't have to be the best, the fastest runner in the world to enjoy running. You don't have to be the best tennis player to enjoy tennis. Obviously, it's not a controversial thing to say, but I think the same goes with languages. So I think, yes, you can learn a language without living in the country,